Well, welcome everybody. This is Pints with Jack's first ever solo Skype session on season 4 for the Screwtape Letters. Andrew Lazo here, delighted to join you all this season and to share a couple of things from my collection. Of course, one of our earliest episodes this season talks about prefaces, the different prefaces in the Screwtape Letters. And so I wanted to show you some things from my library. By the way, if you're ever in the DC area, come on by. We'll have a cup of tea or a pint of beer, and I'll let you wander the shelves yourself. I wanted to show you this. Oh, a big treasure of mine. This is the 1942 early printing of the Screwtape Letters. It came out in February 1942. Lewis finished writing them in 1941. But it was so immensely popular that it went into several printings in the first year. So it came out in February, and this one, as you can see, is from June of 1942. Oh, it smells good. It's got that great musty English bookstore smell. So that's the British first edition. It's a little smaller than the American first edition, you can see. Americans are kind of leaning over their shoulders. So this is the American first. That wasn't published in the United States until 1943 in March. And so this is from June of that year. So this is an early reprinting as well. So has a good smell too, but not nearly as good as the British. In fact, the popularity of Screwtape was so enormous, I believe I talked about this, it actually landed C.S. Lewis on the cover of Time magazine. And here it is, right here. If you can ever find a copy for under $100, that's a pretty good deal. So here's a copy of the Time magazine. They did a big article on him in the religion section. And as you can see, it says his heresy, Christianity, and you can see that devil over his shoulder. That's September 8th, 1947. So, article went. The writer went to Oxford and took pictures of Lewis and asked him a bunch of questions. So it's a fine example of Lewis's early popularity. Here you go. It's got a picture by William Blake, and then that is a pen and ink drawing by Lewis of Screwtape. So that's included on one of the later editions. So it's got a reference to Charles Williams in there, and picture of George MacDonald. So it was a pretty extensive article there in 1947. So that was one of the real impacts of the Screwtape Letters. As you know, Screwtape proposes a toast, and here's a first edition of that. That came out with a new preface. There is that pen and ink drawing, his abysmal sublimity under Secretary Screwtape, as imagined by C.S. Lewis. So this was originally published in 1961. You can see with the new preface, and that's the preface that says it was during the Second German War that the letters of Screwtape appeared in the now extinct Guardian. And so Lewis has a long new preface that he wrote in May of 1960 from Cambridge. So right around the time that Joy Davidman died, as a matter of fact. He must have been feeling that the enemy was on his back, certainly. So a couple of interesting paperback editions. Here's one. This is from Macmillan. It's an American paperback. I don't have all of the Screwtape editions, but here it is. There's that preface. It was during the German War. So that's that one. Some interesting things. Here's the one that I use for our podcast. That's a little bit tatty. I've got my notes all in it. This was my teaching copy that I used when I taught Screwtape for years, with lots of notes in that. So that's a good old, well-used paperback. We like the pretty ones in my house, and so we often get the new signature C.S. Lewis edition series. And so that's a brand new one. This is called decal edging. I'm not quite sure why they call it that, but that's why it's called. Here's a British edition from the Screwtape Signature series of Screwtape Proposes a Toast and Other Pieces. And that preface, it's got an additional preface by Jock Gibb, who was Lewis's publisher. Let's see. Jock Gibb describes this as diabolical ventriloquism. And so that preface came out originally in the Fontana edition of 1965. And Gibbs says, Screwtape's whites are our black, and whatever he welcomes, we should dread. So that's a fun edition of the Screwtape Letters. There's some peripheral things. We'll be talking very soon with my good friend William O'Flaherty, who's done a complete companion and study guide to Screwtape Letters. He's done that on Winged Lion Press. Bob Trexler out there has done some amazing books on Lewis and others. Got some books by Will Voss, many others. There's even, to match C.S. Lewis Goes to Hell, there's also an edition called C.S. Lewis Goes to Heaven, and that's a commentary, a companion to The Great Divorce. So Wing Lion is doing some great stuff. I wonder if you know this. In 1994, Marvel Comic Books, in conjunction with Thomas Nelson, did a Marvel comic book version, a graphic novel version of the Screwtape Letters. And I believe that most, if not all, of the text is in there. So that's kind of fun. You can poke around if you're interested in such things. I wouldn't spend more than $15 if that's what you're looking for. Here's a fascinating one. Maybe you remember and shudder in horror at Bantam Books. Remember those Bantam classics? A lot of our textbooks that we had to read in high school. Scarlet Letter. I think my Scarlet Letter was a Bantam classic. But it was put together by Clyde Kilby. Dr. Kilby's the founder of the Wade Center, the amazing collection there, and he's done some really interesting things on Lewis's work. He's responsible for Letters to an American Lady, for Christian Reflections, and then he and Marge Mead put together Warney's diaries, Warren Lewis's diaries, called Brothers and Friends. But he also did an edition of the Screwtape Letters, and says that this book is about the working conditions in hell, but also with significant overtones concerning our own very balance sheet in the miserific kingdom. Of course, miserific is the opposite of the beatific, the blessed kingdom, so it's the miserable kingdom. Kilby also goes on to say that a devil has his pride. In fact, he has almost nothing else. And so that's the Bantam Classics that you can track down out there. But this is a really fun one. So Spire Books put out this edition. There you go. And it was illustrated. In fact, I think this is the paperback from a company called Lord and King that did an illustrated version of the Screwtape Letters. That's really pricey. I haven't seen it for under hundreds of dollars. You may have before seen this portrait of Lewis. It's kind of taken after the photo that's on the back of Till We Have Faces and a number of other books. Walter Hooper, Lewis's secretary and dear friend, and Owen Barfield, another of Lewis's dear friends. Lewis called Barfield the wisest and best of his unofficial teachers. Barfield was an exact contemporary of Lewis's. They were at Oxford together. Barfield was also born in 1898, but he died in 1997. Can you imagine if Lewis had lived that long, what he might have done? But what's really fun about this is in the back, in addition to the letters, Walter and Owen did a study guide to the Screwtape Letters. And so they've got summaries of each of the letters. And so that's kind of a fun thing to do. But I love that Walter and the Hooper and Barfield kind of tried to do their own kind of preface or dedication. And so here's what they write. His abysmal sublimity Undersecretary Screwtape, T.E., B.S., etc., was born in Pandemonium sometime before the creation of Earth. In celebration of the fall of man, he married Miss Scarlet Fever, but he ate her before they had any children. His once vast popularity in hell turned into hissing and booing when his correspondence with his nephew Wormwood was published by C.S. Lewis as the Screwtape Letters. and he hopes that all humans who read or hear it will be afflicted with bedbugs and gumboils. Dr. Screwtape raises scorpions as a hobby, and he is the author of many successful books, the best known of which are Sex as Salvation, filmed many times under different titles, A Short and Happy History of Earthquakes, Fires and Floods, and Worms and Roses, a practical guide to the cultivation of weeds. You may remember from your Shakespeare sonnets and from Lewis's essay. He's got an essay called Lilies That Fester, and of course it comes from Shakespeare's sonnet that's lilies that fester smell far worse than weeds. So that's Walter Hooper trying his hand, and then there's a little note about the study guide that he prepared with Owen Barfield, and another introduction. And so there's a lot of stuff to be found by poking around. One thing that I haven't seen, but it makes me drool. Lord and King, who put out this edition of the Screwtape Letters, also put out a recording on LPs, and those are around somewhere. And then they were also planning to do a full movie, a motion picture of the Screwtape Letters. Walter Hooper said in this preface, "If I were required to explain why the Screwtape Letters goes on attracting more and more readers, I can think of no more likely explanation than that the book is simply so good it can't be left alone." Not only so good, but so timely. When I was privileged to spend some time with Shane Morris on the Upstream podcast from the Colson Center a couple of weeks ago, he asked me what book I would recommend for the times that we're in. And as much as I love so many others, Till We Have Faces and The Voyage of the Dawn Treader and Grief Observed and Collected Letters, for goodness sakes, I think that perhaps one of the most timely is the Screwtape Letters. And so I'm so glad that you're joining us as we make our way through them. So blessings to you. Thanks for spending a little spell in my library, and let's go further up and further in